this is the Hue Play HDMI sync box, and it synchronizes your TV screen with your Hue Lights. And today I'm going to review it for you. I'll go over the pros and the cons, and at the end I'll let you know if it's worth buying or not. As always, you can find a more detailed written review up on techtechandmoretech.com, or you can just check the link in the description below. Let's get started with the hardware. The HDMI sync box is a pretty nondescript black box that has a matte black sort of soft finish to it. The front of it has a single button to turn it on or off, has an LED light next to it for its status. On the back you've got 4 HDMI inputs, 1 HDMI output, a power plug, and a micro USB port. In the packaging you'll find the HDMI sync box, the power cable and adapter, and an HDMI cable. The HDMI sync box kind of works like an HDMI switcher, so you'll plug all of your devices into the sync box, and then that box will connect to the TV with one cable. So what this means is if you use the built-in apps on your TV to watch content like Netflix or Hulu or whatever, that's not going to work with this box. It needs to be an external source of video. First things first is to set it up. The sync box has its own app called Hue Sync, and it is exclusively controlled from there. The setup process for the sync box is pretty straightforward. You turn it on, you fire up the app, you link it to your Hue bridge. Yes, you need one of those. Once that is connected, then you assign it an entertainment zone. The entertainment zone is kind of like a map of where your lights are and where your TV is, so that the Hue sync box knows which lights to synchronize with which part of the TV screen. Once you've completed that, the setup process is pretty much done. All that's left is kind of fine-tuning exactly kind of where the lights are, and then figuring out what your preference is for brightness and intensity. So now let's jump into the software side of things. So like I said, everything is controlled through the Hue Sync app on your phone. Just a quick rundown, on the top right you've got your toggle to turn the device on or off. You've got your 3 different sync modes: video, music, and game. Each of them have their own defaults in regards to intensity and brightness, but both of these are able to be overridden by you manually, so you can decide what works best for you. I've personally found that it kind of just depends on the content itself. For just regular TV and maybe some sort of laid back movies, 70% brightness with moderate intensity is nice. But if you want more action-packed movies or more intense games, then you want the high or maybe even extreme intensity with higher brightness as well. And then finally at the bottom you can select between the different HDMI inputs, and you can enable or disable the syncing. So basically you don't always have to have the lights syncing with the TV. Maybe sometimes you're just watching in the day and it would kind of be useless anyways, or maybe you just don't want it. And the next tab of the app are the settings. So here you can choose your entertainment zones if you got multiple in your home. You can rename your HDMI ports to the device that it's plugged into. So as you can see, I've got my Apple TV, I've got an Xbox, I've got a Switch. Your automatic control options are, so for CEC power state, so it'll turn off when it detects that your TV has turned off. If your TV doesn't have CEC, you can plug a USB cable into it and then use the USB power state detection. You can have it turn off if it notices that an HDMI port is inactive after 20 minutes. And then your automatic input detected means that as soon as, like, let's say you turn on a device, it will then automatically switch to that device. And you can change this on a per input status. So if there's something that's always turning on or off, but you don't necessarily want it to switch to that, you can disable that. And then finally, start light sync on video signal detected. Same thing as with just changing the input. And then you've got your advanced sync settings. The background lighting setting for this just means that whenever the screen goes completely black, instead of turning the lights off, it'll keep them at a minimum brightness. And you've got your arc bypass option as well for people that have like a receiver that they want it going back to receiver for their audio setup. You can enable this, but it'll only work with one connected input. So you might have to kind of play around and figure out what setup works best for you with ARC. So now that we've completely established all of the settings and everything you can configure, the real question is, how does all of this perform? I would say for the most part it works really, really well, but there are definitely some hiccups. There are definitely some software issues that haven't been ironed out all the way. I've noticed sometimes that if there's a quick change of lights multiple times, my lights will kind of freak out and just like flash bright white real quick and then go back to kind of syncing. And that can be kind of distracting, kind of take you out of the moment. There have also been a few times where it just didn't work altogether and it required a hard reset of the device, just turning it off and on. It can be annoying to have to restart it, especially if you're like in the middle of a movie or something like that. And it can definitely kind of be embarrassing if you want to show up to your friends and family, but it's not working properly. But again, when it works, it's awesome. It can definitely feel a little bit gimmicky, and it's definitely not something that I would say that everyone needs in their home, but there's also nothing quite like it. I think it just works best with media that is very rich and bold in its colors. Things like cartoons, things like video games, or even movies that have a lot of colors like Blade Runner, for example. It kind of just makes the whole experience a little bit more immersive. There are no noticeable latency issues when it comes to video games, so you're not going to be distracted by your lights lagging behind by a few seconds while you're playing a game. I think it works best with video games where the background colors don't change a ton all the time. Things like Mario, things like Zelda, that are sort of more slower paced. On the technical side of things, the Hue Sync box supports 4K at 60 Hz in all of its inputs, as well as HDR10. But what it doesn't support is HDR10 Plus nor Dolby Vision, which are the two sort of highest standards for video quality. It will pass through the signal if it detects it, so you're not going to get like a blank screen. It'll still be able to play on your TV, but it isn't able to decode the signal and then sync it to your lights. If I had to guess, this is more of a licensing thing than anything else. I'm sure the hardware can support it, and maybe, fingers crossed, sometime in the future we'll get a software update that will enable it. But if that's super important to you, I wouldn't buy this until that's confirmed. So all of this brings us to the golden question. Should you buy this? Let's start with the price. The Hue Play HDMI Sync box is a whopping $230. Ultimately, it is a pretty impressive piece of hardware, but even with the Hue tax, that is pretty expensive. This also doesn't take into account the fact that you need a Hue bridge to pair it with, and you also need some color lights to synchronize with. Obviously, the minimum setup for this is to have a color light on either side of your TV. So if you have something like a media center or like a cabinet that your TV stands on, you can probably get away with like a Go light on either end. Or if you have it wall mounted, you probably then need a play bar on either side. If you want like a full experience, I would say having a play bar on either side of the TV and then a light strip on the top and bottom as well. So even the minimum configuration with one color light on either side of the TV, you're looking at almost $400 to get all this set up and running. And that's not including the bridge. And that kind of makes it a hard price to justify. I think the only way I can really recommend anyone buy this is if you're already really invested in the Hue ecosystem and you're okay knowing that there are going to be some software bugs to kind of iron out. But you'll get the sweet synchronization of lights with your TV. As always, thank you so much for watching. Comment down below, how much would you spend to get your lights to synchronize with what's on your TV, if anything at all? Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for plenty more videos to come. Until next time, see ya.